Billionaire discovers hidden truth in a little girl's empty lunchbox. His revealing moment will change everything. Each morning, James Hawthorne glided through the bustling streets of San Francisco in his sleek black Tesla. The sun reflected off the towering glass buildings, a testament to his riches and success. Yet, as he passed familiar storefronts and the daily throng of suited professionals, an unsettling sense of isolation crept in. Achievements piled high like skyscrapers, yet he felt hollow inside, as if he were just a phantom gliding through his empire. Success had drawn a barrier between him and the world, and he felt it acutely, the contrast between his life and the lives of others stark, particularly when a flash of color caught his eye in the park. There she was, Mia, a scrappy little girl, her hands clutching a battered, colorful lunchbox, her wide eyes fixed on the other children feasting on hearty meals. In that moment, time hung suspended. The muffled sounds of laughter faded, replaced by the pulse of his racing heart. Mia's sunken cheeks told a painful story. Hunger was etched into her small frame. It ripped through his so-called world, a reminder that success had numbed his senses, blurring the lines of empathy. He thought of his grandfather, his guiding star, reminding him to extend compassion. But here he was, in a world where numbers had eclipsed faces. The ghost of his past gripped him, and a question ignited within: why had he let himself forget? Struggling against the gnawing tide of guilt, he reached out to the local community center for the first time, intending to volunteer. But it was Mia he observed most closely, recognizing in her the raw tenacity that mirrored his youthful dreams. In that impoverished expression, he felt a pang of nostalgia for the warm lessons of his grandfather, who taught him that wealth without purpose is a hollow crown. Yet each time he contemplated the sanctity of his wealth, the images of corporate meetings and profit margins rushed back, suffocating his moral clarity. Torn between ambition and compassion, he could feel the pressure boiling within him, like steam trapped in a kettle. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reaching more people. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. He dove deeper into this world of local food initiatives to combat hunger, and found himself unearthing darker truths about his corporate partnerships. Profits, he realized, were built on the exploitation of communities like Mia's. The betrayal struck like a gut punch. How could he have unknowingly funded the very cycles of poverty he intended to break? Each revelation twisted his insides further, leaving knots in the pit of his stomach. His empire, the legacy he prided himself on assembling, was fraying at the seams. Sitting alone in his sleek office, an altar of privilege, he felt the suffocating weight of judgment from his peers. They dismissed his efforts toward philanthropy as folly. To them, success was the only currency that mattered, and here he was, diving headfirst into a moral quagmire. With a shunned smile, he felt hope dissipate. For what had he built if he couldn't create change for those like Mia? A shudder ran through him at the thought of what his choices would yield, a fortune or a reckoning. As memories of Mia clashed with the corporate images he had created, the tension culminated. He was cornered by his conscience, standing at a precipice where the choices loomed larger than life itself. What did success mean if it didn't uplift the forgotten? He took a deep breath, rising to face the potential fallout of a paradigm shift. It could redefine his entire existence, or destroy everything he had built. With determination flooding his veins, he knew this was just the beginning. But what awaited him on the other side? James felt the weight of the world pressing down on him as he confronted the fragmented emotions swirling within. He had crafted a life dictated by spreadsheets and bottom lines, yet now, the face of a hungry child haunted his every thought. Each tick of the clock was a reminder that real time was passing, not just for him but for Mia and countless others whom he had overlooked in his climb to success. Pacing his office, he grappled with a growing conviction. It was time to reclaim purpose in his life. The very foundation of his success, built on empirical data and profit margins, crumbled in light of acquired dirty truths. Mia wasn't just an abstract figure in his mind, she represented every soul caught in the gears of an unforgiving system. He was determined to bridge the chasm between his monetary achievements and moral responsibilities. That evening, while the city glistened under the dusk's embrace, he decided to forego his typical evening routine and sought instead to explore the neighborhoods that lay outside his gilded cage. It was a realm he hadn't set foot in for years, yet it tugged at him with an inexplicable longing. Each street he ventured down was alive with energy, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of his world. Everywhere he looked, he saw people, not transactions. Their laughter resonated, reminding him of the warmth he once felt. As he walked, a small community garden caught his eye, a patch of green struggling against the backdrop of concrete. He stepped closer, captivated by the vibrancy of a collective effort that was in stark contrast to his solitary rise. Children played nearby, their voices a harmonious soundtrack of joy amidst hard work. The sight eluded him, revealing something he had long shut himself off from, the profound impact of human connection. It was in that moment, wrapped in a torrid realization, that he struck up a conversation with a kindly old woman tending to the garden. She spoke with passion about the project, detailing how it provided organic produce to households that couldn't afford it. Her stories held a gravity that made James reconsider his own isolationist tendencies. He could embody that force too, he realized, if only he could turn his ambition outward. Days turned into weeks, and as James engaged regularly with the garden project, he slowly uncovered new skills within himself, an aptitude for forging partnerships and an ability to unite disparate voices for a common cause. The stark theoretical knowledge he wielded transfused into a hands-on experience that was immediately rewarding. He was making a tangible difference, transforming a numbing guilt into empowering action. With each interaction, he felt the walls around his heart crack further. Mia's bright eyes became a beacon of hope and kept him grounded. Each day he returned, her laughter mingling with the chatter of the community, felt less like an intrusion and more like a belonging he had long yearned for. Yet despite the promising horizon he was charting, he knew that deeper waters lay ahead. His corporate commitments still loomed over him like a specter, beckoning him to reconcile the duality of the man he was becoming with the machinations of the empire he had built. The moment was approaching where he must confront those entrenched interests, challenge his collaborators, and perhaps face the opposition that would rise in his path. There was no longer a return to the comfort of ignorance. His heart raced at the thought. Expansion of his success could also lead to backlash from those who feared losing control. What would he sacrifice for a cause greater than himself? The determination to redefine his legacy burned fiercely, but he found himself faltering at the threshold of confrontation. Would he have the courage to stand up for the vulnerable when the shadows of his past threatened to claw him back into complacency? As night cloaked the city in uncertainty, a fresh resolve pulsed within him, urging him to move forward. It was time to take the next step into the fray, but the first act of this challenge would draw him deeper into the shifting tides of his world. The pull of the unknown loomed larger than ever. Would he be ready for the test that awaited him when he faced old allies seeking to preserve the very system he was beginning to dismantle? James awoke the next morning with a sensation that was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. It was time to test the resolve he had forged amidst the vibrant chaos of the garden. He sat on the edge of his bed, the sun's rays casting a warm glow on the floor, illuminating a roadmap of decisions he would need to navigate. There was a meeting scheduled for later that day with the board of his company. They were expecting the same old James, the one who brushed aside challenges in favor of profit margins. But he wasn't that man anymore. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The mental image of Mia's laughter floated into his mind, pulling him forward. Her innocence, juxtaposed against his societal privilege, propelled him to confront the very foundations of his past decisions. But how could he articulate his newfound beliefs to an audience steeped in tradition and greed? Would he be able to articulate the complex intertwining of morality and business, or would the suffocating grip of fear silence his voice? At the office, the familiar sterile environment felt different today. The pristine white walls and monochrome furnishings now seemed sterile prisons that encapsulated minds unwilling to challenge the status quo. He sat at the conference table surrounded by familiar faces whose smiles felt increasingly hollow. They talked of metrics, forecasts, and growth strategies, their language as distant to him now as a foreign tongue. As the discussion wore on, it became clear that nothing had changed. Profit was still king, and it ruled over their conversations with merciless authority. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, grappling with the realization that this was an audience he had not yet fully prepared for, one that reveled in ignorance, blind to the very truths he'd been unearthing. When it was his turn to speak, his voice felt like foreign machinery rattling in his throat. He cleared it, feeling raw and exposed. Instead of discussing quarterly outcomes, he urged his colleagues to consider the human stories behind their numbers, the Mia-s of their world who paid the price for their decisions. The silence that followed his words felt oppressive, as if the whole room held its breath at this unexpected shift. "Are you suggesting we pivot our strategy?" One board member finally scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. "That's not just impractical, it's downright naive." James could feel the heat of their skepticism, but he pressed on. "What if we could innovate in a manner that champions sustainability? What if our profits could align with care for our communities? We can lead in a way that transforms lives, rather than just balancing spreadsheets." His words hung in the air, a daring divergence from their safety net of comfort. But beneath their objections, he sensed an undercurrent of intrigue. Was it possible that his resolve could unsettle the status quo just enough to lay the groundwork for change? He met their disapproving gazes one by one, steeling himself for a reaction he hoped would be more curious than cruel. As the meeting ended and voices faded into the background, he felt a moment of uncertainty locking in his chest. The cold weight of doubt sought to reclaim him, whispering of failure and rebuke. Yet there was something different in his resolve today. He was no longer fighting alone. Somewhere in his heart, he carried the fire of possibility ignited by Mia and the warmth of human connection he had begun to rediscover. In this moment of collective ambivalence, he realized the path ahead wouldn't be easy. There could be losses, sacrifices, friendships, or alliances that might turn to ash. He pondered at what cost he would continually fight for this cause, knowing fully well that the very comforts of his life were at stake. As he took a deep breath, the pressure of impending choice loomed larger than ever. The shadows of his past ambitions stirred with discontent, tossing him into a storm of uncertainty. He would need allies, not just within his boardroom but in this newfound space of emotional integrity he had begun to carve for himself, and the question danced on the edge of his subconscious like an unfinished melody. What would he do next, not just for himself, but for a world that needed awakening? When he stepped out of that building later, he would find clarity at the intersection of his ambitions and his values. But first, he had to confront those who would defend the fortress he aimed to dismantle, even if that fortress had, for too long, been his own. Would he find the courage to take that fight within his own organization? The answer loomed closer as he prepared to step onto that battleground, where the real test of his character awaited. James left the boardroom feeling as though he had entered a new realm, one fraught with the risk of losing everything he had built thus far: his credibility, his connections, perhaps even his job. But amid the maelstrom of anxiety and doubt, he felt the stirrings of a deeper conviction. As he walked through the glass corridors of his office building, he recalled moments spent with Mia, the world unfolding gently before a child's imagination. The stark contrast between her innocence and the relentless drive for profit gnawed at him, haunting his thoughts. Why had it taken him so long to question the path he had pursued? In the din of corporate ambitions, he realized he had been overlooking something fundamental: the impact of those decisions on actual lives. Lives like Mia's. Slumping into his office chair, he found no solace in its familiar embrace. His mind sought clarity amid the chaos. How could he pivot this powerful vessel in a new direction? The fear of backlash simmered in the backdrop of his thoughts, a drumming reminder that challenging the status quo could leave him isolated. Yet the embers of resolve flickered within him, urging him to act. He reached for a blank notepad, the pages pristine and untouched. His hand trembled as he began to sketch out a plan, a veritable blueprint for change. It felt exhilarating and terrifying, each stroke of the pen carrying the weight of possibility and responsibility. He envisioned initiatives that could intertwine community welfare with profitability, projects where the bottom line could coexist with a heartbeat. But who would come along for this ride? Would his colleagues heed the call of collaboration or cling to resistance born from years of habitual thinking? The realization struck him that convincing a board steeped in tradition and self-interest would require more than a mere shift in rhetoric. It would demand an evolution in mindset. Determined to motivate them, he toyed with the idea of orchestrating a team retreat, not just any retreat, but a retreat built around empathy. What if he could bring in social leaders, change makers who had successfully united business ethics with community-driven initiatives? Watching his colleagues experience the challenges faced by people like Mia firsthand could be the catalyst needed for transformation. He could see it, the gradual crumbling of their defenses, the awakening of conscience. However, the echoing voices of doubt persisted. What if they resisted? What if they scoffed at the idea? The stakes felt precariously high, and James paused to grapple with the fear clawing at his insides. He pushed back against it, realizing that remaining silent or conforming to expectations would mean penalizing not just his values but his very essence. That wasn't he the man he wanted to become. With renewed energy coursing through him, he picked up the phone and set out to assemble a team. He reached out to influential figures within and outside the company, people whose insight and experiences could challenge the entrenched perspectives of the board. He felt the familiar tension rise in his chest, but it was now accompanied by a sense of urgency, the kind that made his pulse race. This was more than a professional pivot, it was a personal manifesto, a battle for integrity in a world that sorely needed it. By the end of the day, as he compiled a list of possible speakers and workshops aimed at reshaping narratives, he sensed a shift both within himself and the company. Excitement began to weave into the apprehension. There was potential here, not just for him but for all those he hoped to inspire. Yet, lurking beneath the surface wasn't just enthusiasm, it was tension and impending confrontation. The board would not take kindly to challenges that threatened their grasp on power. Fear mingled with determination as he readied himself for the storm ahead, knowing full well the personal sacrifices that could come from a fight against the fortress he had once called home. As he finalized the retreat details, a vivid ache flooded his consciousness, a reminder that this journey was as much about change as it was about self-discovery. What facets of himself might be revealed in the process? And as he steeled himself for what was to come, a single pressing question remained. Would he emerge as a leader of integrity, or would he crumble under the weight of his own ambitions? The next phase of this transformational journey was upon him, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Would he embrace the risks, risking reputation and comfort to forge a new legacy? Or would he retreat into the safety of silence when faced with adversity? The answer loomed large, waiting for him beyond the confines of uncertainty. James spent the next few days engulfed in a whirlwind of planning but was haunted by doubt at every turn. Each ring of his phone, each email notification felt like a countdown to an inevitable fallout. In those moments, he often caught himself questioning who he had become amid the corporate grind. What justification could he provide if the retreat flopped? Would vision articles ever heal his desires for change or merely serve as a crutch for his failures? As the hour of the first team meeting approached, he stared out of the window, his breath fogging up the glass. He glanced at the city skyline, each building towering over the other like ambitions screaming for dominance. But here he was, stuck at a crossroad: continue down a path riddled with complications or steer towards the unknown, risking ridicule among his peers. With a deep breath, he strode into the conference room. The faces of his colleagues, indifferent and skeptical, scanned effortlessly over the room while he sensed the weight of their expectations hanging around his neck. He was acutely aware that the ground was shaky beneath him. What if his propositions were met with scorn? "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady yet laced with undercurrents of urgency. He presented the seminar details, the potential speakers, the highlight reels of previous workshops that changed organizations for the better. Each word sought to lift the room's spirits, but glances exchanged among his colleagues hinted at doubt. They were considering the fallout of diverging from their golden path, a path paved with past successes. They didn't yet understand the necessity of incorporating social responsibility into their business models. Imagine, he continued, searching for the right angle, an opportunity that not only enhances our profits but revitalizes our brand image. We can create a shift, something that wouldn't just resonate within these walls but extend beyond to communities. The youth, the marginalized, the MIAs of our society. A voice interrupted from the back. And what if it fails, James? What if we lose clients over something that isn't part of our core business strategy? John, a seasoned executive known for his hardline views, wore a disinterested expression, arms crossed defiantly. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. James' heart raced, but he pressed on, feeling a flicker of resolve ignite within him. Risk is inherent to innovation. It's a gamble worth taking. If we don't adjust our sails, we'll be swept away by tides we don't control. We owe it to ourselves and to the future of our company. The tension thickened, and the silence stretched, exposing the fragile dynamic. He could sense the resistance, each colleague a barrier veiled in tradition. Mentally, James reeled back to the child who once dared to dream freely. He yearned to channel that spirit now. He needed allies rather than opponents. "Who's with me?" he boldly asked, breaking the silence. "Let us not merely tread water. Let us redefine what can be done in this industry." Yet, the room felt colder. James distinctly heard John scoff softly. "You seriously think this isn't just a passing fad? You're thinking with your heart when you need to think with your head." Every objection stung like a piercing jolt, raising the stakes in a way he had not anticipated. This wasn't merely a proposal he had crafted. It was a piece of himself he was laying bare. The voices of doubt weren't only external but screeching through his mind, scrambling his confidence. What if they were right? What if these ideas really were folly? James' pulse quickened in urgent rhythm, the soundtrack accompanying his internal descent. He could feel the walls drawing in, the taunting whispers of failure amplifying in his mind. But a surge of defiance rose within him as he fixed his gaze on John. "This isn't just about comfort, it's about creating ripples of change amidst stagnation. I know it sounds risky, but I've seen alternatives work, both here and elsewhere. We can evolve, we must evolve. I refuse to let fear silence the dreams I seek to nurture inside and outside of this room." He left the meeting unsure, the air of discord trailing behind him like a cloak. But with every step he took back to his office, determination solidified within him. He might not win over everyone right away, but the seeds were sown. As he settled into his chair, a sudden thought jolted through him. This was just the beginning. The true test lay ahead, an illuminating confrontation with John that would reshape their relationship and perhaps even the course of his proposed initiative. James knew he was at the precipice of a bigger reveal, and with it, an inevitable reckoning awaited. The moment approached when they would have to go beyond surface disagreements and confront the reality of their values. Would he realize the strength of his conviction amidst adversity, or would he succumb to his doubts, forever questioning the leader he could become? The office buzzed with the usual distractions of the corporate world, but James' mind remained tethered to the weight of that meeting. Reports lay stacked, waiting to be reviewed, but for him, the numbers blurred into insignificance against the backdrop of his internal conflict. His thoughts echoed with John's skepticism, a relentless reminder of the division that now coursed through the company. Each click of the keyboard felt like a nail puncturing his resolve. He made a promise to himself, though. Determination would not waver. He would forge ahead. Instead of diving into his next mundane assignment, he charted a strategy to engage with his colleagues more personally, to sway hearts as much as minds. The retreat wasn't just about the ideas, it was about building a shared vision. Collaborating meant cultivating relationships. The question loomed, how could he bridge the gulf between ambition and skepticism? Days turned into nights, and James began crafting his plan. He recognized he had to show vulnerability to break the barriers John had erected. A less rigid conversation with him, perhaps over coffee. A chance to peel back the layers of their professional personas, to reveal the motivations that drove their decisions. Perhaps he could even find common ground instead of hostility, viewing John not simply as an adversary, but as a fellow traveler on an uncertain path. As he prepared for this dialogue, he realized he needed not just to be convincing but genuine. What led John to be so staunchly opposed to change? Was it fear of association with failure, or perhaps a more personal dilemma rooted in his own past experiences? The day arrived where James, propelled by mounting determination, approached John's office. In that moment, he felt the familiar jolt of anxiety. Taking a deep breath, he knocked lightly before stepping inside to reveal a cluttered desk strewn with paperwork, emphasizing John's quality of sticking to the status quo. "Hi, John," James began, his voice steadier than earlier. "Do you have a minute? What's this about?" John leaned back, his posture rigid, arms crossed, the gesture like an impenetrable fortress. James swallowed, navigating the nerves that threatened to surface. "I wanted to talk about the proposal, about your concerns." A brief silence fell between them. James couldn't decipher John's expression, but he pressed forward. "I get that change is uncomfortable. I'm nervous too. But what if we could make it work? We could redefine success together." John's brow furrowed as he sat forward. "You really think we can just flip a switch and change the culture here?" James shook his head. "No, it's not about flipping a switch. It will take time and buy-in from everyone. But if we could show them why it matters, how we can align our goals with something bigger, we might just create the momentum we need." A quiet moment passed. James sensed the air shifting slightly, just enough to inspire a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't about convincing John but collaborating with him to explore the possibilities, removing the barriers between their desires and fears. "What do you know about my views, James?" John's tone softened, curiosity tinged with defensiveness. James took a step back mentally, realizing the rawness hidden in their professional relation. "I know you care about results, and you've been successful in your way. Maybe we can find a path that doesn't sacrifice those results, but uplifts them." At that moment, a brief vulnerability flickered in John's gaze, an openness that fortified James' resolve. Was it a weakness or an opportunity? Bellies of doubt coiled within him, but he recognized he was confronting the uncomfortable truth of their difference, John's realism against his idealism. But the tension flatlined just as quickly. John leaned back, adopting his defensive posture again. "I appreciate where you're coming from, but I don't think this will work. You're too focused on hopeful outcomes rather than practical implications." James clenched his jaw. He knew the conversation wasn't over, nor did he expect immediate resolution. There was more groundwork to lay and common ground to uncover. If John wouldn't budge today, perhaps he could plant the seeds of curiosity about why change could genuinely matter. Stepping out of the office, James realized he had tasted both the bitterness of resistance and the sweetness of potential connection. The confrontation was far from resolved. In fact, it had only just begun. He needed to innovate his approach, perhaps even gather allies willing to voice their support. His own commitment demanded rallying others into a shared vision. As he walked back to his desk, determination reignited. But what would be the next step? Would other team members join him in rethinking their values within the company? Or would he find his ambitions further isolated in a leadership culture of compliance? The ground beneath him shifted yet again, complexities unfolding like a story yet to be written. It was time to challenge himself and others. Hidden alliances awaited discovery, waiting for a leader brave enough to find them. But would he have the courage to reach further beyond personal ambition? James returned to his desk, heart racing and mind swirling with thoughts heavy with uncertainty. His earlier conversation with John echoed in his ears, a constant reminder that the path before him was laced with skepticism and resistance. But as each moment ticked by, he realized that simply talking wasn't enough. He needed to act. The realization hit him with clarity. If he wanted to spark change, he couldn't merely hope for people to rally around his vision. He needed to galvanize support actively. Without it, his aspirations would remain just that, ideas floating in isolation. The office was a web of interpersonal dynamics, each connection a potential ally or adversary. He remembered the colleagues who had once expressed enthusiasm for improvement, the ones who shared his setbacks in silence. They were the first step. James looked around the office. Who was paying attention? He needed to identify the thinkers, the doers, the ones like himself who yearned for more than mere compliance. He reached for his phone and opened a chat with Sarah, a dynamic project manager known for her innovative ideas that never quite made it past the discussion phase. He needed her creative spark. "Hey Sarah, can we grab coffee later? I'd love to bounce around some ideas." He hit send and felt a rush of both anticipation and tension. Would she see the value in what he was trying to achieve, or would she dismiss it as another corporate endeavor doomed to fail? On paper, they were colleagues with different operating philosophies. But then again, wasn't it possible that her expertise could complement his aspirations? As the minutes drifted into an hour, he found himself brainstorming ways to approach the meeting. He picked up a pen, a habit from his college days, and began jotting down thoughts. What if they organized a casual meet and greet? A gathering where employees could share their vision for the company's future? It wouldn't just be about him speaking, it would be a platform for everyone's thoughts. His phone buzzed. A reply from Sarah illuminated the screen. "Sure, I'm interested. What's on your mind?" The warmth of her curiosity ignited something within him. He wasn't alone in this. There were threads he could weave, connections to be forged. James quickly typed a response outlining the idea of a get-together, a casual forum where employees could both speak and listen, a sanctuary for shared aspirations. Over the next few days, he poured energy into planning the forum with Sarah by his side. They sketched out a structure that would encourage openness, providing tools for everyone to articulate their ideas. His initial sense of urgency morphed into an underlying rhythm of excitement. But beneath that enthusiasm lay another layer: doubt. What if no one showed up? What if the naysayers, like John, crushed the spark before it could ignite into a flame? Doubt, like a persistent shadow, loomed. Yet the act of planning a tangible manifestation of his intent gave him a sense of purpose. He began to believe that connection could be fostered if they approached it as a community, rather than as a hierarchy of us versus them. Perhaps, amid shared challenges, they could discover a shared purpose. As the date of the forum approached, a wave of anxiety rolled back in. He thought of the obstacles they would face, and intuitively, he knew John would look for flaws in this initiative. This realization forced him to confront his fear of external judgment. It was time to transform his apprehension into a powerful indictment of compliance and constraint. The evening before the event, restless energy pulsed through him. He sat in semi-darkness, a few notes scattered across the table, his mind racing and thoughts colliding. He was driven by a singular determination. The time had come to rally his colleagues against the inertia binding them. But as he finalized the presentation, another realization began to surface. This collective forum was not merely a tactic, it was a moment of exposure. It would demand authenticity from him and others. How much was he willing to reveal about his own vulnerabilities? Would he embrace the discomfort of leading with honesty, or would he retreat into a polished, safe front? Nothing came easy. He understood this was a stepping stone toward reforming the company culture, but could he withstand the weight of transparency? With the event looming large on his horizon, he felt an exhilarating blend of fear and optimism. Now, it was about to become a defining moment, one that would either forge unexpected alliances or further entrench the initiative's opposition in hierarchical indifference. What awaited him the following day? Would they be met with open-mindedness, or would skepticism reign supreme? The future felt precariously poised on the brink of change. The morning sun filtered through the office windows, illuminating the quiet chaos of James's desk. Papers were strewn across the surface, his carefully crafted notes about the forum a cacophony of scribbles and revisions. He could feel the weight of each detail pressing down on him, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Today would be pivotal, yet doubt clung to him like a stubborn shadow. As he paced the floor, he replayed the agenda in his mind. Would they truly engage, or would the silence of indifference echo louder than any voice of dissent? He could hear John's dismissive remarks even now, The man exuded a sense of authority that often seemed to drown out the more timid voices around the office. What if they sided with him instead of joining James in his vision for a more collaborative workplace? James forced himself to breathe, redirecting the anxiety into focus. Each step was a deliberate effort to summon courage. He glanced at the clock, his stomach tightening. The start time was nearing. He thought of Sarah, wondering if she was ready to co-pilot this venture into the unknown. They were leaders, albeit unwittingly, but did that mean they were prepared for the tumult ahead? As the clock struck the hour, employees trickled into the conference room, creating a hushed murmur that filled the space. James stood at the front, an ocean of familiar faces before him. Some appeared curious, while others looked skeptical. Their expressions ranged from excitement to guarded indifference. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor of uncertainty. "I want to share a vision, one that we can all shape together." He felt the pulse of opinion rippling through the room, both in favor and those resistant to change. Yet he pressed on, sharing his vision for a culture of transparency and feedback. As he spoke, something shifted within him. He was no longer just a proponent of change, he was exemplifying it. Transparency was his cargo, and vulnerability felt inevitable. He shared stories of his own missteps, failures that led him to the realization that growth was rooted in discomfort. He saw heads nodding, a few small smiles surfacing in the crowd. Was it possible? Could he inspire them to rise beyond the confines of their roles? Then the moment came that he feared most, an open floor. Questions began to emerge, some probing, others supportive. He maintained his composure, even when faced with John's skeptical glare from the back of the room. In that moment, James felt the room tighten around him, a collective breath held in suspense. John's voice cut through with calculated precision. "So, you want us to expose our weaknesses? To air our grievances? And why should we trust this will lead to anything but chaos?" James's heart raced. The challenge was out in the open, but so was an unexpected thought. The old James would have retreated, but something different stirred within him now. "We learn through honest discourse," James replied, the words tinged with a newfound determination. "Change isn't comfortable. But growth happens when we challenge our status quo." The air shifted again, agitation simmering beneath the surface, but also the flicker of potential activation. He noticed some colleagues exchanging glances as they began forming small discussions, weighing the idea quietly amongst themselves. Could this moment be the spark? As the session progressed, James felt the momentum swaying toward possibility. But apprehension lingered, nagging at the edges of his thoughts. Would this moment of openness burn out like a fleeting flame, or could it ignite the kind of cultural renaissance he envisioned? At the close of the forum, as attendees filtered out with murmurings of possibility, James glanced at Sarah. Her eyes sparkled with the prospect of something greater, but he could sense the caution. Today was just the beginning, he mused, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," she replied. "But there's no going back now, is there?" The day's events turned in his mind as he left the office, filled with a mixture of elation and trepidation. Tomorrow would demand more. More authenticity, more courage, and perhaps even more confrontation, as the walls of complacency would inch closer to a reckoning. Little did he know, John was already strategizing his counter-moves. The time had come to face the true opposition. Would confidence or doubt dictate the next move? James awoke the next morning with a knot of tension in his chest, a weight that felt heavier with each passing second. He glanced at the mirror, the dark circles under his eyes betraying a sleepless night. The gravity of his own ambitions pulsed through him like a relentless tide, demanding more than he felt he was capable of offering. The drive to the office felt longer than usual, the city whipping past in a blur as he suppressed swirling thoughts about John and the impending confrontation. What if John's skepticism had taken root? What if the courage he'd summoned yesterday was merely a passing phase? Swallowing his fears, he focused on the flicker of determination that had ignited during the forum. Upon entering the office, the atmosphere brimmed with electric tension. Conversations flickered to silence as he passed by, whispers cloaked in discontent and uncertainty. It stung. He had hoped for progress but was met with a palpable undercurrent of resistance. The thought of John waiting in the conference room weighed on him, each step towards it an arduous climb. As he settled at his desk, he contemplated the feedback from the forum. It had sparked interest, but now what? He could envision himself stepping into a leadership role defined by innovation and trust, a place where dialogue flourished and ideas were exchanged freely. Yet visions often conflict with realities, especially when those realities harbored opposition like John. With determination brewing, James gathered his notes from the previous day. He began crafting a detailed plan for introducing ongoing discussions, a series of smaller forums to foster continuous engagement. He pictured inviting anonymous feedback which could guide their discussions, ideally drawing on voices that had felt marginalized before. "Hey, can we talk?" Sarah's voice interrupted his thoughts, pulling him back to reality. "Sure," he replied, sensing her own apprehension reflected in her eyes. "I've been thinking," she trailed off, her brow furrowing as she chose her words. "You really did something bold yesterday. But do we have a strategy for when John makes his move?" James leaned back, considering the weight of her question. "I'm not entirely sure. We push forward, maybe? But if he undermines our efforts, it could set us back. People are already divided." The ringing truth of her words struck him. "What are you proposing?" "A direct approach. We need to clarify our objectives and rally support. If John tries to dismiss our initiatives, we can counter it with collective enthusiasm. We can show that we believe in this change." Reinvigorated, James felt a rush of adrenaline. They needed to gather allies, embolden others to step beyond the shadows of uncertainty. "You're right, Sarah. We'll need to frame it as a movement rather than a solitary initiative. But we must be prepared for resistance." Moments later, in a makeshift strategizing session with a handful of colleagues who had publicly supported the vision, James unveiled his ideas. The atmosphere buzzed with energy. As they discussed action plans, James could sense the resolve within each person. They were ready to join the fray, to unearth the potential hidden beneath layers of complacency. But then he hesitated, a gnawing doubt creeping in. Would this united front dissolve under pressure? What if John, with his boundless charisma, squashed their collective will? Just as doubt threatened to unfurl his resolve, one colleague raised her hand. "We could create a supportive environment. If we build a bond now, we can withstand John's tactics." Their words echoed through James, resonating within him. The momentum was shifting. But external challenges loomed ever larger, and James recognized the battle wasn't simply against John, it was a fight against the intrinsic culture that had long been embedded in the organization. He needed to fortify his newfound leadership with tenacity and resilience. As the day wound down, James felt a flicker of hope amidst the strain. They would fight for this change together, yet a flickering anxiety was growing. Would John retaliate decisively, or was their united front strong enough to withstand his machinations? Tomorrow would unveil the next chapter in their battle for a transformed workplace. With John on the horizon, one clear thought pushed through the haze. It was time to confront not just the opposition but the very doubts that mingled within himself. Was he prepared for the choices he might have to make? The sun rose on an intense day of reckoning, illuminating the San Francisco skyline like a spotlight focused on James Hawthorne's internal struggle. Today represented a turning point, a culmination of his transformative journey from a titan of industry to a champion of a new paradigmatic vision. He stood before his reflection, a man reshaped by purpose, ready to confront not only John and his entrenched opposition but also the remnants of his self-doubt. As he stepped into the office, the atmosphere pulsed with an electric tension. Colleagues murmured among themselves, some hopeful, others skeptical. He could feel their eyes on him, each gaze a reminder of the stakes involved. James had decided to formalize his initiative into a comprehensive proposal, an actionable roadmap. He had written down the feedback from his forum. Their voices would be the guiding principle as he sought to dismantle the fortress of silence and complacency amassed by the old guard. Gathering his team, James introduced the proposal in a dynamic meeting. With a crisp presentation, he outlined not just potential profitability, but the profound impact their innovation could create in the communities surrounding them. He spoke of collaboration, empathy, and the urgent need for genuine accountability. Each word resonated with the passion of someone reborn. He projected confidence that demanded to be taken seriously, a reflection of his growth as a leader. Nevertheless, he was acutely aware of the storm brewing. The whisper of discontent in the form of John loomed large. As the presentation concluded, the moment of confrontation approached. John, arms crossed defiantly, rose to challenge James, dissecting his proposal with surgical precision. "This is a distraction from our core business. These values you articulate sound noble, but they often lead to losses. Are you ready to risk your position for a cause bordering on idealism?" James felt the weight of doubt claw at him once again. The echo of resistance was unmistakable. However, instead of retreating, he drew upon the very essence of his journey, the understanding that true leadership requires both conviction and courage. "John, we cannot measure success solely in numbers. What good is our wealth if it doesn't contribute to the betterment of those around us? Implementing these initiatives is not just about change, it's an investment in our future as a brand that stands for something meaningful. Can we afford not to explore this?" Silence enveloped the room, and through it, he sensed a shift. Some of John's supporters hesitated, eyebrows furrowing as they weighed the stakes. James seized this moment, inviting colleagues to share their thoughts, experiences, and visions for a new corporate landscape. Others began to speak of their connections with the community, their experiences of seeing how corporate actions reverberated in real lives. With an undeniable collective energy building, James felt the tide turning in his favor. Voices that had been silenced for too long were stepping forward, echoing a sentiment he had yearned to hear. They began to rally around the idea of merging ethics with business, igniting an ember of optimism that grew into a blaze of determination. In that moment, James realized how far he had come, not just in challenging a corporate structure but in understanding the immense potential of united voices. He felt validated. People he once viewed as adversaries were now allies, rekindled by the notion of purpose over profit. The tension that had once clouded his judgments dissipated, replaced with a solid confidence bolstered by the support of his team. The meeting concluded with a unanimous decision to support the initial steps of the proposal. It felt surreal, the smoldering doubts of yesterday transformed into a collective resolution. James understood the path to enduring change would be fraught with further challenges. Yet, he was no longer navigating it alone. As he stepped out into the San Francisco sun, a newfound clarity washed over him. The journey had indeed redefined him. He had transitioned from a man ensnared in ambition to a leader grounded in purpose. James glanced back at the office, aware that the shadows of his past would continue to linger, but they no longer dictated his future. In the days that followed, he was deliberate in nurturing this newfound culture. Empowering others through transparency and reciprocity transformed the workplace, unlocking potential that had lain dormant for too long. The impact of his work reflected not only in profits, but in the lives of people inspired by courage, particularly Mia, the little girl whose empty lunchbox had reignited his spirit. James Hawthorne had achieved far more than career advancement. He had conquered the ghosts of isolation, actively engaging with humanity's tangled fabric that connected all dreams and aspirations. He became a conduit for advocacy dedicated to affirming the human cost behind every spreadsheet. Glancing at photographs on his desk, images of Mia and the community garden, he filled with a deep sense of fulfillment. He had proven, against all odds, that growth began not in unilateral ambition but in a shared mission to create a legacy that helps others thrive. This was the man he had always meant to be. The clarity he had gained, the recognition from his peers, and the commitment to a structured, compassionate workplace brought not just satisfaction but responsibility. The fog had lifted, the horizon brightened, filled with possibilities and a prosperity that resonated beyond the self. To anyone seated in a similar space, hesitating on the brink, James had one final message: the path to true change begins with you. Stand firm, embrace discomfort, and choose purpose over ambiguity, and you will rise to create an indelible impact. Now, it is your time to take action. Subscribe immediately to this channel to ensure you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories. This is the moment to show your support. Leave a like now to fuel the algorithm. Be a part of this journey and comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. Don't wait even one more second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformative conclusion. Your engagement helps us keep telling powerful stories of personal overcoming.